Okay, so a quick video with my thoughts about the first trailer for Dark Souls 3's second DLC, The Ringed City. I'm going to say this right off the bat that this will contain a minimal amount of crazy theory and conjecture. People always apply the zany theories during this time when we don't know enough to say anything for sure, and 99% of the time, they're incorrect by the time the full product comes out. I'm going to try to stick to the facts and what we have at our disposal to try and make some sense out of the images we are seeing. Let's get to it.
The close of the Age of Fire. The Ringed City is said to be at world's end.
Okay, so first off, we've got the dark sign. Obviously, as most of us know, the dark sign represents the undead curse, hollowing all that, and is pointing us towards Londor, as many of us expected. Just under a different name, it would seem, or maybe Londor is just a smaller part of the overall picture of what the Ringed City will be all about. I don't actually think that the Ringed City is Londor itself, since this pilgrim of Londor, who I presume is speaking right now, only says that the city is to be at world's end, as if it's not some well-known fact. Presumably, if you're a pilgrim of Londor, you know where Londor is. The Ringed City is somewhere else apart from Londor.
Past this heap of rubbish, as far as one can go.
If this is the pilgrim speaking, then it's interesting that she refers to these amalgamation of towers and castles as a pile of rubbish. I suppose this would make sense for a hollow to say, since for a hollow, life is eternal, in a way, from a certain point of view at least. Any kingdom that is established or set up is destined to be doomed and crumble away eventually. It's got a lifespan, while the undead can really live as forever. What excites me, actually, about this part of the trailer is that it discusses the fact that, it's at world's end. It will be a journey to get to the Ringed City, which is something that Ariandel really didn't deliver on, in my opinion. If we're about to undertake a great journey to the Ringed City, that's something that sounds very cool. That the space in between where we start and where the Ringed City is, they could fit a lot of content in there and a lot of stuff for us to see, which is really what I'm hoping for. Here we see a couple of interesting things, and the main focus should be on the crystal-like things that seem to be on the ground and on the right side of the frame, the locusts in the background, and the sword of avowal kind of pointing out from the right-hand side. You can kind of see the tip of it above the crystals. Now, the Sword of Avowal is something held very sacred in the land of Londor. The official description of the item in Dark Souls 3 reads as Ceremonial Sword of Londor. Cannot be equipped as a weapon. It is said that a rite of wedlock will presage a true hollow lord. So the Sword of Avowal is something very important in Londor culture, but here we see it kind of tossed aside in ruin. Now, if what FromSoft is doing is kind of pointing us in the direction that Londor is not the be-all, end-all of this world that we're kind of watching crumble away, I think that's a very cool move. They're expanding the world rather than narrowing it down to one place, which is something I was worried that they were going to do. Now, the locusts are something that interests me greatly. There was a screenshot of one posted on the Dark Souls Facebook page with a description for the photograph, and this is from Bandai Namco, so I assume that it's legitimate. And it reads, "When a city falls into an abyss, locusts will then arise," with abyss capitalized. It is said that they will feast on anything and everything that is in their path. This could mean a few things. We could be traveling through a land that's been consumed by the abyss. Now, I'm going to nerd out again here because you guys know I will. Karthus fell to the abyss. Karthus is to me what Velka is to the Ashen Hollow. Of course, we see no really desert landscapes in the trailer, but you never know what might happen. They do remind me of those enemies from Ashes of Ariandel that feast on the rot of the painting. So these could just be another parasite, but in real life. You can see that kind of pincer poking out from the back of its tail, which could be part of its attack pattern. Probably might be a very tricky enemy to deal with, but we'll have to wait and see. If what we'll be traveling through is basically the converging again of all these lands around and close to the first flame, there could be many different lands that we've just heard about that we'll actually get to see even in their ruined state, and I think that's something to be really excited about. This is something small, but I thought I'd mention it all the same. I find it interesting that From decided to purposefully put this shot of a windmill inside the trailer. Now, the only real windmill that really comes to mind when I think of Dark Souls is Earthen Peak, of course. For many of you it may be the same. Those that are more knowledgeable about Dark Souls 2 lore have kind of pointed out that there are some references to Dark Souls 2 throughout the trailer. There's also this small part, so as we know that Earthen Peak had this kind of pit of poison that the boss kind of stands in. In the description of this screenshot, which contains this almost greater bat-winged demon, it reads, "With a grotesque look, having been exposed to poison, their flame is fading away." Now, we're going to be talking about this demon in just a little bit, but I thought it'd be interesting that it's surrounded by poison. Now, Earthen Peak was filled with poison. Whether there's a connection there, it's unknown to me at this point, obviously, as it is to pretty much everyone, but I thought I'd point it out anyway. So here we see this mysterious tower, which was again showed in a piece of concept art on the Dark Souls Facebook page, pretty much from the same or a similar angle. And again we see the Sword of Avowal at the top, which makes a connection to it to Londor. It's interesting that it's just standing there by itself quite unnaturally. That might be a side effect of the lands converging or otherwise. Again, not too much to take from this. It looks like it could be a church or a cathedral of some sort, or maybe actually a chapel. Could be related to the Sable Church. Again, this is one of the things we'll have to wait and see what happens when the product is actually released. This figure as well caught my eye just because of the grey giant that appears a little bit later in the trailer. It does look like a very tall humanoid sitting down at the edge here. And I'll be talking about that grey giant in just a moment, but I think that's interesting to note as well. And also what seems to be somewhat of a red phantom down the bottom of the frame. Vadividya pointed that out, and I think that might be an apt comparison to make between those two shapes, but we'll have to wait and see again. Okay, let me be honest, this was the first moment in the trailer that actually got me really excited. The fact that we're seeing Lothric knights in this new area is truly fascinating to me. I'm a big fan of the Kingdom of Lothric from a lore point of view, and the fact that they're out wherever this land seems to be, much far beyond the borders of Lothric, is something really intriguing. On the right-hand side, we see a Lothric knight carrying this banner that seems to emit this miracle when put down. Now, we know that Lothric was a fan of restorative miracles, and it's interesting that they're carrying a banner like this. I've seen, illustrations of military forces in the Middle Ages carrying banners when entering new areas to kind of announce their presence and where they come from. Now, I actually believe I know why this is, and I'll explain this. So in Dark Souls 3, to get from the High Wall of Lothric to the Undead Settlement, we need to show the small Lothric banner just at the edge of the cliff to be delivered by Batwing demons to the corner of the Undead Settlement. Now, at first, I couldn't really make sense of what this item was all about, but I think I know what it's all about now. So the description reads, "Small banner held by Lothric messengers. Hold up outside the main castle gate to be greeted by an escort." So here we see the usage of this banner by Lothric. Totally understandable. However, I don't think the original users of this banner were from Lothric. And I say this for a few reasons. Okay, firstly, look at the appearance of it. Does this look like something that would be produced by Lothric Kingdom after you see all the art and architecture and design that they put into everything they use? This was carried by the Pilgrims of Londor. It bears the dark sign, it's tattered, and it fits in right with their design, their aesthetic. The rest of the item description reads as, "When the high wall appeared," so when the lands converged, "the path to the undead settlement was blocked, and messengers came bearing this banner. These messengers were pilgrims of Londor. They were sent out with a duty, but had no way of returning." This may seem really obvious to you, but I didn't understand this for the longest time and only really picked up on it today, because of course it would belong to them, and that's of course why Emma would have it. They're praying to the room where Emma is in, so of course they would have presented this to her and she would have made use of it. In other words, the Pilgrims of Londor used this banner for the Batwing demons to, bring them to Lothric, or maybe they just traveled to Lothric with this banner held up in front of them. But then it was utilized by Lothric Kingdom to travel back. And that's why we have this knight here, bearing the Lothric banner. The official Lothric banner, that is. At least that's my theory, but I'd like to hear what you have to say about that. There's another Lothric knight here on the left that seems to be kind of enwreathed in these vine-looking things. Now, we see this kind of effect again in one of the screenshots, again released on the Facebook page, which I'll put up now. Now, the description for this screenshot reads, "Vicious knight swinging a giant greatsword. Sunken in a swamp, his body is swollen with every cavity bloated. Instead of having a head, a clump of darkness dwells, and with armor half decayed." I thought at first this was a winged knight of Gertrude, but it's not. The armor set has too many differences, although that would have been really cool to see. Now, there's a lot of talk of this area called Dreg Heap, which is one of the areas present in the DLC. So this warrior, this knight, may have been kind of infested with dregs, possibly human dregs, as we know about from Dark Souls 3. And perhaps the same fate befell this Lothric knight. Let's continue. So here we see two new items. It seems to be like a lightsaber straight sword and possibly a miracle or a sorcery of a bow shooting a lightning arrow, it seems. Now the first area was more interesting. It seems to have some bookcases lying around, a new enemy. Those bookcases could be from the Grand Archives or Duke's Archives or something like that. We'll have to wait and see about that. But again, it kind of denotes this journey that we're undertaking, which I'm really looking forward to if it's what it turns out to be. So this was another moment that really piqued my interest, like the shot of the Lothric Knights before. This seems to be a kind of towering figure, and it's described in the Facebook page with another piece of concept art, which I'll put up now. So now, I know everyone's clamoring for this to be all Father Lloyd, which I can totally understand. They thought the same thing about Father Ariandel before we found out that it was, not all Father Lloyd. However, I think there's actually evidence for this to be all Father Lloyd. And again, I don't want to get into the zany theories. I'm purely basing this off some evidence that I found, and I'll present it to you to see what you think. So the description of the concept art as it's given on the Facebook page reads as, "A grey giant who has existed since the Archdragon was found. The giant used to be a judicator working under the gods." Now that second line is something I want you to remember as we're going forward. I was thinking to myself, a judicator of what? To judge what? One's worth, one's skill in battle? And then I remembered the jewel charm description from Dark Souls 3, which reads, "All Father Lloyd's knights lived in fear of his jewels of judgment, in which verdicts were carried out by his sword of law." Considering Lloyd literally judged others as a fearful trial, possibly by combat, that is a connection that I think makes the Lloyd theory strong. I feel that we will get an understanding as to why the Way of White collapsed in this DLC, as we can see that many lost faith in Lloyd over time. This is seen from the Kareem cleric's point of view, which reads in a description, "The clerics of Kareem had always strongly asserted that Lloyd was a derivative fraud, and that the All-Father title was self-proclaimed." Although that's about as zany as I'm going to get on this whole fiasco, so let me know what you think. Okay, so obviously this was going to be something to bring up, and again, this was another thing that piqued my interest a lot. I think it's relating back to Lothric Kingdom, and I'll explain why. Some people have, guessed this to be Lillian or some other character or Guinevere, but I don't think so. I think this is Gertrude. So for those of you that might be a little bit rusty on your Lothric lore, Gertrude was considered as basically a holy maiden of the Queen of Lothric, aka, as many of us think, Guinevere. Also, it was said that Gertrude was visited by angels, and once she made contact with them, she was basically rendered blind and mute. However, she was also given a pair of wings by these angels. Now we see this an angelic figure in the previous shot, which is interesting. As you can see on her face, it seems like she has some kind of corruption coming out of her eyes, which might mean that she is blind. She's also one of the reasons why there was a Lothric civil war. The winged knights that we fight in Lothric are allied with Gertrude. They fight for her as well as the golden angelic knights who actually have wings of their own. So a very interesting and really intriguing character that I'd love to learn more about. As for the egg, I think that's, even more fascinating. As we know, Ocelot was basically half dragon, half god. From, the DNA that went into it, it would be the Queen of Lothric, who, if it is Guinevere, and Osiris, a kind of pseudo-dragon, or dragon wannabe if you prefer. So wouldn't it be cool if this egg was actually Ocelot's egg, but, it could be any crossbreed's egg, it could be Priscilla's egg for all we know. I really got to hand it to From as well. I love how this whole shot is framed. It's beautifully designed, and they've just done a really nice job design-wise for this. And again, from the lore perspective, it's very, it's speculative. So let me know what you think as well. I'm sure I might have been missing something here. And then we've got Orphan of Cause 2.0. Just kidding. This seems to be, as Vaddy pointed out when I was talking with him about this on Twitter, as like a greater Batwing demon, which we can clearly see. It's got the same horns, similar physiology, and from what we can get from the Facebook page description from that screenshot I showed before, it also says, the last survivor of demons who was born from the flame of chaos dwelling below the land. So that's interesting. I mean, it seems to negate what we knew about the old Demon King, who was said to be the last living witness to the Flame of Chaos. So, are they retconning something here, or is this something totally new? Either way, it's intriguing. And that seems to be the whole trailer. I know I just put a video out last night, but obviously I had to cover this in some sort of capacity. I am not overhyping myself for this like I did for Ashes of Ariandel. I am going to play it kind of close to the chest and just don't get overhyped and just look forward to what we have in the future. There's also a number of other screenshots and pieces of concept art which I haven't talked about, but I'll include those in the description if you want to have a look at them yourself. I was just kind of wanting to have a look at the trailer and put something out about it. But as always, I hope you enjoyed, and I'd love to hear your theories about what you think's going on. This, what they've shown us so far looks a lot more interesting than what they showed us for Ashes of Ariandel anyway. So, let's give it a shot. Let's see what comes along with it. And yeah, look forward to March 28th. There'll be some more lore videos coming out for this one, I'm sure of it. Later on.